Morning. Today is October the 29th, 2019. We are with Mr. Craig Carter, CEO of the Advent Christian Village in Dowling Park, on the beautiful banks of the Suwannee River. I am Janet Erith, assisted by Dale Baker. We are from the Suwannee County Historical Commission. Stephen Snipeman of Do Good Media is our videographer. This morning we are interviewing Mr. Carter as part of our oral history project. Mr. Carter, we appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to participate in this project. I am sure that your insights into local history will be of great value for generations to come. Please tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Janet. That's very kind of you, and it's my privilege to have this opportunity to share a little bit about myself and, more importantly, the ministries here at Advent Christian Village. There's a rich history here at the village, and I am so pleased to have had a small part in serving here. As you said, my name is Craig Carter, Craig Artis Carter. Artis is my middle name. That's the one name that is part of the lineage of the Carter family. Was named after my grandfather, Matthew Artis Carter, and so I'm privileged to have that middle name, even though it is a little bit of an unusual name. I was born here in Suwannee County in the old Live Oak Hospital, and Dr. Dietrich, who was a doctor here for many years, delivered me. I have a brother and two sisters who grew up here in Dowling Park alongside of me. Just had a wonderful childhood here. Attended Suwannee County schools throughout. Graduated from Suwannee High School in 1981. From there, went to Aurora. At the time, it was Aurora College. Turned into Aurora University, where I graduated with a degree in business and in social work in 1985. While at Aurora, I met my wife, Vicki. She was from that area, and can distinctly remember sharing as we got more serious, "Honey, I love you, but I'm moving south." It was too cold in that area to live, and so upon graduation, we actually lived in Tampa for about 6 years, and at that time was interested in beginning a family, and also was interested in making a move out of the Tampa area. And my parents were down visiting, and was sharing with him that we were kind of beginning to look to move. And he said, "Have you ever thought about coming back to Dowling Park?" And I'm like, "Well, really not necessarily." But he said, well, he had a position here that was curious if I might be interested in. And so we prayed about it, thought about it, and couldn't think of a better place to raise a family than here in Suwannee County. And so it was just the two of us at that time. We've moved back to Dowling Park, where I began serving here, actually doing fundraising and also overseeing the village square, the lodge, and some of the marketing duties. Right after we got back to this area, we had our first child, Adam, and he was born in '93, so he's today 26, married, has our only grandchild, Andrew, which we so love. He's an accountant that actually works for a firm in Nashville, but lives in Lake City, close by. His wife is a nurse, and so enjoy them. Our second child is Timothy. Timothy is a first-year medical student at going to med school at FSU. Hope to be a doctor in a few years. A little ways to go, but seems to be doing well. And then our youngest, Lindsay, she is a junior at Valdosta State. Timothy is 23 and Lindsay's 20, and she is a math major. And so we're blessed with three wonderful children, and really felt that they were our life growing up, and certainly devoted a lot of our time to raising them, and enjoyed spending time with them. Did a lot of traveling together, and felt that was more important than toys, to get out and to travel and to see the United States. And so that was a good time. So good.
Could you please tell us about your parents and grandparents?
Sure. As I shared, my parents were here in Live Oak. My father was from Waycross, Georgia. His name is Jones Pomeroy Carter. He grew up in Waycross. My mother, Jerry Lynn Harris Carter, grew up in Morganton, North Carolina. They met also at Aurora College. Both went to the same school where I attended. And upon graduation, he was actually looking to go into the ministry to become a pastor, but God has a way of working things out for his good. That fell through, and at the same time that fell through, I'll share as we go forward. My grandfather was here in Dowling Park at the time and was interested in someone to succeed him more full-time. And doors opened for him to go to Florida State to receive a master's in social work, which he did, and then moved to Dowling Park to assume leadership at the village in '63. And so once they got married, pretty much Dowling Park was their home throughout their career. They both continue to live here at the village or right outside the village and are doing well. My wife's family is from northern Wisconsin, up northwest of Green Bay. She grew up in the Chicago area, but actually when she graduated from high school, they moved to north of Green Bay. He took early retirement. He was an educator of a deaf school, was a principal of a deaf school, and took early retirement and went back to the family farm and went into dairy farming, back into dairy farming. And so that was always an experience to go up to northern Wisconsin. We got it wrong. We always ended up there at Christmas time when it was the coldest, but it made you appreciate the weather in Suwannee County to be up there in the cold winter time. But still is enjoyable to be up in that area.
Well, I think that brings us to, please tell us about the Advent Christian Village and how it came to be located in Dowling Park.
It's a very interesting story. There's really two people that was integral to the village being established. They were Thomas Dowling and Dr. Burr Bixler. Thomas Dowling was a very wealthy businessman, as I'm sure in some of the other historical records of Suwannee County he's recorded, that had a lumber mill here in Dowling Park. He also owned the LOP&G Railroad and wanted to establish a camp meeting site in the south, similar to what they had in the northern areas. He had been converted to the Advent Christian denomination through an evangelist on the courthouse steps, and ended up attending the Advent Christian Church, in Live Oak. Dr. Bixler was his pastor. He offered to give the land to the denomination if they could raise $10,000 to put the buildings on the site here in Dowling Park to establish this camp meeting area. The denomination couldn't raise the money, and so the land was just sitting there. And Dowling, during that process, he passed away. And so the board was left with this land and didn't know what to do with it. During that time, Dr. Bixler received a letter from a dying widow asking if the denomination had an orphanage where her children could grow up in the faith that she so loved. He had to write her back and say that no, he knew of no orphanage within the denomination. But that was impetus for him to go back to that conference board and said, hey, we haven't been able to raise money to establish a camp meeting site. Would you make the same deal if I can raise $10,000 for buildings for an orphanage? Could we put an orphanage on that site? And the board said yes, they agreed to that. He was able to raise the money to establish an orphanage. That original family, we don't know what happened to them. We believe that he was able to find a placement for them with another family. but they were able to establish the buildings, and on December 17th, 1913, the first children came to what is called the American Advent Christian Home and Orphanage at that time. They were the Setzer children from North Carolina, 5 children, and many of their descendants still live in this area today. In fact, we have a deputy sheriff that we work with the sheriff's department to have out here. His grandmother was one of those 5 original children that lived in Dowling Park. The board also, is written in the minutes, felt that the denomination needed, and they said it as they felt it needed to be said back then, they needed a place for their old and worn out ministers and missionaries to go. And so retirement began that next spring in 1914. That actually makes Advent Christian Village the first retirement community in Florida. It's been in existence longer than any other community. There's a couple in the Jacksonville area, Penny Farms and Moose Haven, that began a few years later, but in a state known for retirement, it's been done here in Suwannee County longer than anywhere else in the state. So it began, and through those early years, the orphanage was probably the larger part of the village. Dr. Bixler oversaw the home. He was known as Daddy Bixler. In addition to operating the home out here in Dowling Park, his office was in Live Oak. He ran the Present Truth Messenger, pastored the Live Oak Advent Christian Church, and also, I believe, was on the school board. And so he was very active in life in the community of Live Oak and Suwannee County. He operated and ran the village up until 1950. And in fact, again, some of that relationship, my father attended Camp Suwannee out here for many years, which is part of the ministries here. And there was a youth rally going on at the Live Oak Advent Christian Church in 1950. And my father attended that rally. Dr. Bixler was the speaker. After that rally, that night, he had a massive stroke and passed away the next day. And so he served as the leadership of the village throughout his life and until the day that he died. One of the interesting things, going back to the beginning, is that Dowling had a desire to give more property than he gave to the village. And he had a business partner that ended up buying all of his holdings. And he honored Dowling's request and gave the property that he intended to give. That individual was Richard Sears of Sears Roebuck, that gave a lot of the property that the village sits on today, which is real interesting. And what's really interesting is I mentioned the 2 other retirement communities. One of those is Penny Farms. And so both of the oldest retirement communities in Florida have roots in some of the retail operations of Sears and Roebuck and J.C. Penney's. But that's always, I think, interesting for people to understand that Sears was active in this area, sold property through the catalog in this area, and it was a real interesting story.
How much did Sears give, and how much did Dowling give?
I am not sure the actual property numbers. I believe total together they gave 120 acres. And where the breakdown is there, I'm not sure, but I can give a plug for people that really are interested in the history of the village. We believe it's important and to preserve history as the Historical Society does. And we have an archives wing that's part of the library here in Dowling Park. And a lot of those records are stored in that archive wing, and it's open every day for people to come in and to pursue and find out a lot of those statistics.
I understand that Millie Griswold is in charge of that.
Millie is our archivist, and she is in charge of that and storing those records, and has a team of volunteers that help her to keep those records. Yes.
Now, could you possibly bring us forward to the current objectives?
Sure, of the village. Of course, in 1950, when Bixler passed away, it was not a smooth transition because it happened so suddenly. There were two gentlemen over the next 7 years that were pastors that worked to kind of hold things together. It was struggling. You know, you'd come through the Great Depression, and there was a lot of challenges during that time with, just trying to survive. The home really relied upon donations almost solely back then, and can remember stories of people where it's written where basically they'd go to the mailbox to hope that there were checks in there so that they could pay the staff and go buy food for the groceries for the orphans that were here. It was really tight and challenging during those periods of time. It really culminating in the 50s, where you had pastors that were trying to oversee the community. They were not only typically managing the village, but also trying to assume some of those other roles that Bixler held with the Present Truth Messenger, and even some of the pastorates around. The home almost went under, and it was at that time that my grandfather, who had taken early retirement, was approached to see if he would come and help the village for 3 months to get on its feet. His name was Matthew Artis Carter, the one who I'm named for, out of Waycross. And they asked if he'd come for 3 months to help them get on a financial footing. That was back in about 57, and he never left. He stayed here until he passed away in 77 for the next 20 years. So he moved. One of the things he did right off the bat was saying, I'll work with the home and orphanage, but those other entities, will have to be someone else's responsibility. So he moved the office here to Dowling Park and began to really work towards putting the village on a more strong financial footing. They had pretty much had challenges with most of the businesses in town, with not paying their bills, and they had extended them so much credit that they weren't really eager to see anyone come in the door from the village during that time. He went to each of the businesses and kind of just laid it out, said, we've struggled, we know we owe you money, put us on a cash basis so we can get caught up, and that began turning the village around. But they needed someone to then assume the role more full time, and that's when my father was approached. I guess he was in college during that time, and he would come home during breaks and kind of help his father out, doing some of the marketing, some of the other efforts to help in planning. And this was really a defining moment for the village. The home building, as they called it, was an old wooden building that was an infirmary, pre-runner to a nursing home. It was condemned by the state, and they gave them time to find a replacement, but that they were not going to be able to continue to use this building. So my father tells the story of sitting in a board meeting as this young, brash college kid, kind of in the background as the board's discussing this with my grandfather. And they were talking about Moody Air Force Base having some old Quonset huts that they were no longer in need of since World War II was over, and that they could go up there and get one of those real cheap, and that would satisfy the need for a nursing home. And I guess my father says, he says, I just made me mad. And he said, so I stood up, this young brash college kid in the back says, we can do better than that. He said, I believe our people, if we would bring a quality product, will get behind that, and we should be out raising money and build a state-of-the-art nursing facility. And so they said, all right, go do it. And so he went out and worked with my grandfather and raised the money to build the nursing home, which at that time was the Myrtle Carter Hall Nursing Home, which really was a change of, instead of just doing enough to get by, was not doing things with glitz or glamour, but do things quality. His philosophy, which he pushed on down to me, was anything that we do in Christ's name should be done to the best of our ability. And so that's been our philosophy here since that time. And so that was a big change. They asked him then to assume the role as president, as I guess it was executive director at that time, after my grandfather retired again in 1963. So he served in leadership of the Advent Christian Village from 1963 till 1996, and so was here for a number of years, and saw really a lot of growth and development within the village during those next 30 years. And so asked him one time, how and why did you do what you did? And he said, basically, one, we realized that we needed steady income in order to do the ministry that we wanted to do. Just relying on gift income was a challenge. And so the effort was to create apartments that could be rented, where those who had the resources would pay for the services and the rent that they received, that enabled them to provide those services to those who required additional care. And then was to listen to what people needed and wanted and provide it for them in the way that the apartments were built and what direction that we headed in. So you saw a major expansion in retirement in the early 70s as you built what was called the Dowling House, which was an 80 apartment complex and a new nursing facility at that time. During this period of time, senior services were beginning to increase. Children's services were continuing. During the early years in the 1920s, there was as many as 100 to 110 children here. But during the years I grew up, the late 60s, early 70s, I was born in 1963, there were about 30 children here at the village, and we were just one big family. Growing up, whatever the children of the village did, we were right alongside. This was our life. We grew up here in Dowling Park, and what was done for whether it be the children or the seniors, that's what we did. The parties we went to, we worshiped in the church together, and spent Sunday afternoons romping through the woods and playing together as one big family. But during this time, greater emphasis began to be made with services for seniors, and that was to grow, to provide stability to the organization, so that ministry could continue to those in need. Then in the 80s, you had another major expansion with the Carter House that was established, which was another 100 apartment complex that began, the 6-story building there. And that was unique in that on a retirement community campus like this, both the Dowling House and the Carter House were HUD facilities. And so we were able to take advantage of those programs, governmental programs, to provide services to seniors at the level that they could afford. If a person qualified with rent, only a third of their income was used to excuse me, for rent and utilities, and that continues today. And those provided that opportunity to serve more people and to provide stability to that services. So then we continued to move forward into the 90s, which was another innovative program for the village, which was establishing Riverwoods. In the modern era, one of the most defining events was the 75th anniversary, which would have happened in 1988. Through that process, a new 20-year master development plan was created. And out of that plan, a number of the facilities that you see today were envisioned. The nursing home, the Good Samaritan Center, was in that plan. The Copeland Community Center, the Wellness Center was in that plan. Riverwoods, which is a housing development, which was another innovative program of the village where for the first time people could own their own home here at the village. It was theirs, not in a lease program that reverted back to the organization. It was theirs to pass on to their heirs as they determined saw fit. Riverwoods was part of that plan. The Copeland Clinic Medical Community was part of that plan. Adams Emergency Services Station, which is our partnership with Suwannee County to have a fire EMS station here, that was part of that plan. So the new church, the village church, was part of that plan. Dossier Manor was part of that. So all of those facilities were envisioned out of that 20-year master development plan that was established as part of the celebration of the 75th anniversary, and really defined growth here for the next really 25 years until the 100th Centennial Celebration back in 2013. And so you've seen steady growth throughout the years. And my father retired in 1996, and Jim Humbles was named president of the village at that time. Jim had served here since the early 70s and assumed the role of leadership. And his focus was on finishing those projects of the 20-year master development plan that he and my father and Sid Bradley really were the leadership team that developed that plan. In addition to the capital improvements, he also began to focus on services that were added here. And you saw a number of different services come into being, establishing a home health agency. I say that our greatest asset is our greatest liability, and that's our location. We're on this beautiful campus on the Suwannee River, a gorgeous place, but it's very rural, as we all know. And there's not the services in the surrounding area that are needed for a retirement community. So we've had to establish a lot of those services ourselves instead of partnering with other entities. And so Jim was very instrumental in beginning a lot of services that were needed at that time that has helped make the village continue to be viable as we move forward. As we've grown and as the village has changed, it's been interesting. As we have changed, so has our constituent that we serve. Gone are the days back from my childhood and even the buildings that were built in the 70s where the thought was, well, I just need some small little room to spend my final days and everything will be okay, to where now we want to continue our lifestyle that we've had for years. And so the efficiency apartments that we were constructed back in the 60s are no longer what is desired. You'll see in one of the newer projects that we created as part of the 100th campaign, and we'll talk in a second about where we're going forward. Those are a lot larger, are built with the closet space people want to have. Even when we built Riverwoods, the first homes were small, little, even 900 square feet, 1,100 square feet, to now they're up upwards of 2,000 square feet as people are wanting to continue to have the same lifestyle. Demands are different. We see that in society in all walks of life. People are wanting different things than they did. For instance, they're wanting choice. Again, we used to joke growing up, you can have whatever you want for lunch as long as it's chicken. Baked chicken was at every meal. But now we want choice, and so we have choice and options, and the desire for people to stay in their own homes is much greater today than it used to be, and so services are provided here so that as we age, we can stay in the home much longer than before. Volunteerism is completely different. Again, people would volunteer and just spend all day volunteering, and now people want to volunteer, but they want to volunteer on their time and have the option to come and go and have that flexibility. So yeah, I mean, as lifestyles has changed, as culture has changed, certainly our ability to serve, the programs that we provide has changed, and we see that only continuing now as the baby boomers begin to retire. The village, though, is really more of a second or third retirement home for people. We find that most people, when they retire, their first thoughts is, I want to do whatever that I dreamed about doing all day long, every day, whether it be fishing, play golf, travel, shop. I want to do that. Well, that lasts a couple of years, and then it's like, I want more meaning in my life, and I want to still contribute. And the village, has provided that opportunity because we maintain that we're first and foremost a ministry. We were established out of the church, out of an expressed need, and that continues to be our mission. We're here to express the love of Christ through the services that are provided to seniors, families, and children. And so people grasp hold of that and becomes important to them as we are a big family. The sense of community, of neighbor looking after neighbor is extremely important as we go forward as well. And so it's a lot of what we do. We still continue to have programs for children. That's important that we maintain that focus as we continue to serve. We do not have a residential children's program like we used to have. Public policy changes have made that challenging for us. However, through Camp Suwannee, we provide a number of services and programs. We've established what we call Adventure Camp. We find that foster children do not have a lot of the same opportunities that children from a traditional family might have, and so we've developed a quarterly camp where they come to the village for a weekend, and it has been programmed so that there's services and enjoyable activities just for them. And it's so heartwarming to hear as they come in the door. Some of them will say, "I'm home," and will think of the village as home. And one little girl had pulled on the pant leg of the director as they were doing a scavenger hunt, and were actually having to get in a canoe and paddle under one of our fountains to find the next clue, and just having a great time with it. And she just looked up and says, "You did all this for us?" nobody ever does anything for us. And so, to be able to provide, a time of respite and enjoyment for foster children to look forward to has been a wonderful opportunity for us to continue to serve children. We provide leadership training for high school juniors and seniors, and we've just started a new mentoring program. One of the things that we found through some of our scholarship efforts that have been made available through a couple of trusts, especially the Marvin Jones Educational Trust, is that a lot of the same children each year receive the scholarships of the various organizations here. And I attribute it to that either they have the personal drive or they have parents or support system that is encouraging them to be involved and to seek those scholarships. Well, and that's great and wonderful for those children, but there's other young people out there that have the ability but just are not fortunate enough to have that support system. And so we've designed a program that it's a mentoring program that we are identifying young people as they are entering high school and are assigning them a mentor to help provide some of that structure and guidance. And as long as they maintain the standards of that program, when they graduate from high school, they have a $10,000 scholarship to help them go on to school as well. And that's either through trade school, whether it be at River Oak Technical College or through one of the other universities, because we're just wanting to help young people to put some direction and to help to change their trajectory in life. And so we're excited about that. This is the first year. We have 5 students in the program starting now as freshmen, and we'll do that each year, so that each year we expect to provide about $50,000 in scholarships to these seniors once they graduate. So that we're encouraged about that. That's a new program as we go forward. To drive the village forward over these next years, we started again as the Centennial Celebration with another development plan. We recognize that we really have a lot of the infrastructure in place to serve into the future and the programs that are in place. We really need to grow, not massive, fast growth, but we need to grow because a lot of these infrastructure necessities that we have here have excess capacity, and by growing it helps us to cover the overhead cost of those. And so we have established a number of new living options that will be coming online over the next few years. One of those was Taylor Commons, which was taking some of the apartments that were designed for previous generation that was really no longer marketable. We took out 14 older apartments and used that space and went back and added 28 apartments in there that were larger. Those are across from the village square and have been very successful in Taylor Commons, and then also Lawrence House that was named in honor of Suwannee County residents Arthur and Ann Lawrence, which was 8 apartments within a 2-story building there. That again provided us the ability to reach this generation as opposed to the previous generations. We'll be expanding with a new manufactured housing neighborhood. Will be one of the next projects that we'll build in phases. We are expecting to open up 10 or 20 spaces. Once those are filled, we'll move it on, and eventually there'll be about 110 new manufactured housing homes in that community. We're looking to add a new assisted living facility, more of a home-like setting assisted living. This new one will have about 12 homes within that structure, and it'll start a new neighborhood that will begin to cluster multiple homes with assisted living within that community, but in more of a home-like setting instead of more institutional like Dossier Manor is currently. And then we're doing some zero lot line homes, and that is a home ownership product that's on a smaller lot there.
And that is happening everywhere, isn't it? That's one of the newer things to do, right?
It is. Right now we have currently have Taylor Commons, which are the new apartments, and the zero lot line homes. Those are being built as they come under contract. It's a smaller neighborhood with only 9 total. If that goes well, we may expand into the future into another area. Currently, we have 4 there, and are looking to continue those out over the next few months. And so they've been very successful. What that provides, again, is providing choice and options. People still want to have the opportunity to have equity in their home, but they're not wanting to worry about all of the responsibilities that go with home ownership. And so it has a homeowners association with it that we assume responsibility for. If the air conditioner goes out or too many of those things occur, we take the responsibility of getting those fixed and repaired for people. And so that's been very popular for folk as well.
This has just been great. Is there anything else you would like to tell us about anything?
The village has really touched my life, touched my family's life. It's been a privilege to be a part of the community. It has been since we grew up here. Just hard to see where the village ends and our life begins. As I share with people, though, I would not want to be a part of the organization if it did not have its mission that it does. We're here first and foremost to serve Christ and to do what we do to the best of our ability so that people can live their years out at their optimal level. That as we age, we can age with dignity and with grace and with choice. And same with children. To be able to provide the ability for children to blossom and grow into adults is a great opportunity. It's a rich history, has had a lot of challenges, but you could see God's hand through all of it, as at the time it was needed, He's raised up people to provide the leadership that was needed. He has provided through donors that have given tremendously, not only to provide the care for the people that the village serves, but to provide the village itself. I think of people like Bernie Copeland, Marvin Jones, Aquila Smith, Buck Rogers, E.L. Phillips and Mrs. Phillips, and just a number of people that God has worked through in order to make the village what it is. And it's a privilege, and we consider ourselves a part of Suwannee County, and a privilege to be here. It's our home too. The village employs today about 485 people. Has a budget of about $26 million. So those funds primarily are being flown right back into the community through wages. That's the majority of what we provide. Although we do employ folk from the surrounding counties, primarily it's from here in Suwannee County. And so we're the second largest private employer within the county. And so feel that we're part of the community, and hope the community feels they're a part of the village.
As we do.
Thank you.
Steve, Dale, you have questions?
I got a question for you. Did your father and grandfather ever preach here at the village?
My father and my grandfather were both ordained, and they would preach from time to time, never full time as the pastor here. My grandfather, however, once he retired, did pastor at a local Advent Christian church over in Lafayette County, just outside of Brantford, called the Ephesus Advent Christian Church. The church, actually, again, the village did not have a church out here until about the mid-1960s. I remember as a child going into the Live Oak Advent Christian Church. And it wasn't until a individual who was in the nursing home asked Ina Hart, who was providing a Bible study for those who couldn't go into town, to preach a sermon. And so she's considered the founder of the village church. That services began in Dowling Park. And so, yeah, early on, I remember going into Live Oak to the church. And if we were real good in church, we could ride back on the bus with the kids instead of having to ride back with mom and dad. So that was always an encouragement and incentive to behave. Didn't get to do that all the time, though.
I was just going to suggest, and I don't know that it's necessary, but growing up in all the scholarships, those names, I heard those names every year. And you mentioned a couple early on, but then right at the end you said names like such and such, such and such,
Mm-hmm.
such and such. I think it might be interesting to have, even maybe as a separate clip, just kind of quick who's who of people who have been involved.
As I mentioned, there have been a number of key donors that have really helped to allow the village to grow as it is. And that's not to take away from all of those who have supported the village over the years, because it takes all of us working together to accomplish this important work. Some of those key folk, Mr. Marvin Jones, a very interesting story. Most of the individuals that have supported the village have been touched by this ministry in some way, as their family has been served. His family was served in the Good Samaritan Center. Marvin Jones, who established the Marvin Jones Trust, which was a $1 million trust to provide scholarships, he was a local gentleman here from Suwannee County that went to college on a scholarship. Through that, was able to become employed by the Williams Brothers piping company. When he was president of that company, they supplied over 40% of the pipe for the Alaskan pipeline. Also under his watch, they built the most difficult pipeline in the world down in South America. And so he not only provided that educational trust, but provided for a number of the infrastructures and a couple of different facilities here as well. Bernie Copeland, another gentleman that grew up in Suwannee County, whose family was touched by the village. He ended up early in life going to Jacksonville and started, as he says, as a grease monkey for a trucking company. Ended up purchasing the company. It was Plouffe Trucking that had over 900 trucks. He supported the village greatly. I tell the story, it's funny. He called me one day and says, "Craig," he said, "how do you spell benevolent?" I'm like, "Benevolent?" I said, Benevolent. He said, Benevolent. "You're right." He said, "I'll give you $25,000. And so I was like, what would happen if I wouldn't have spelled it right? But he was very generous. He gave the primary gifts for Copeland Medical Center, the Copeland Community Center, actually for this building that he gave in honor of my parents. He would never give the entire amount. He said, "I'll give half." He says, "But everybody needs to take ownership and be part of the project." And so he was very instrumental in a lot of the giving here. Aquila Smith was another individual that was very generous to the village. Gave primary gifts for the J. Ralph Smith Center, as well as the swimming pool in one of the cottages. She was the third person ever hired, as I understand it, by Georgia Pacific. There was the owner and a lot man, and she was his secretary to begin with. Would tell the story about how on those cold mornings in Augusta, she'd have to go out onto the yard, get some scraps to go put them in the fire in the office so that she'd stay warm. But she ended up becoming head of donor relations for Georgia Pacific from way back. She was an Advent Christian from Augusta, and was very instrumental. E.L. Phillips, my father says, the Phillips family out of Jacksonville really helped to change the village in that they gave the primary gifts for the Phillips Civic Center, and he had given part of the gift. She was going to give through her will some funds that were left over that Mr. Phillips had provided for her. She didn't need those and wanted to have a part in seeing that come to fruition, so Dad went over, met with her, and from that they established the Civic Center in the mid-'60s that really began to change what the village looked like out in this area. They were active in Gulf Life Insurance Company. I believe were part of the founding group of that organization. Another Advent Christian that was very generous towards the village that a lot of people don't realize was Advent Christian was Colonel Sanders from Fried Chicken. He was an Advent Christian, grew up Advent Christian up in southern Indiana, just outside of Louisville. In fact, I remember going up to an appreciation day for him as a child, and I was able to meet him, and he, through his life, set up some funds to support the village, and he and his wife, and we're very generous here. Buck Rogers was very generous, a local gentleman. He and Marvin Jones were best friends and talked about when they were young, just getting started, they'd be fishing on the river, would stop so they'd see some of Marvin's family, and would sit on the riverbank and say how they were going to come back and help this place, and how both of them have given so much to make the village possible. Frank Taylor is more recent, Taylor Commons, that has contributed greatly to the village. Was a businessman, created a component that was used by IBM out of Connecticut. And so a lot of fascinating stories, a lot of fascinating people have been involved in the village as we have gone forward.
Mr. Carter, thank you very much for sharing with us the story of your life. You were a gracious host, and we appreciate the insights and history you have shared in such a delightful way.
Thank you. My privilege.